Cincinnati is indeed red hot right now, and they're showing us what the purpose of a baseball season could be, even if they don't win the World Series.
You are Locked On MLB, your daily MLB podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans. Welcome to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. This is the daily podcast. We talk about all of Major League Baseball. I'm your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully. I'm an Emmy-nominated television producer. Easy for you to say, who's been a baseball podcaster for over a decade now. And now I've been at the Locked On Podcast Network for the last 5 seasons. Follow us on Twitter. As long as Twitter still exists, follow us on Twitter at Locked On MLB Pods. Don't read too many of them now. Or you can follow me also personally at Sully Baseball on Twitter, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. And be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. For those of you just listening to me, we have a YouTube channel. Look up Locked On MLB and you can watch my face talk about the things that you're hearing. Sometimes I have inflections and sometimes I hold up things. Like the other day, I held up this Shohei Ohtani cup, and today later I'm going to be holding up some magazines that I found in my own home and how that illustrates what the purpose of a baseball season could be. Hey, new sponsor today, Sleeper. Swing for the fences on Sleeper Picks, and you could win a 100 times your money prize. Not sure if that's grammatically accurate. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDON. You'll get a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use. Currently operational in over 30 states. Check out Sleeper today. Hey, I'll tell you what you should check out. The Cincinnati Reds, since they have called up all their young players, it's really been magical what they've been doing. Ellie De La Cruz, who has just been sensational since coming up, has shown that he's a switch hitter, but he's having a lot of trouble with left-handed pitching. He's only had 3 hits against left-handed pitching, which, of course, when you're batting that poorly on one side of the plate, you kind of got to wonder, maybe he shouldn't be a switch hitter. Maybe he should only hit the right side of the plate. But today he went up against Corbin and the Washington Nationals, and De La Cruz matched his right-handed hit total for the season in the first 3 at-bats. He had 3 hits right-handed up until today and got hit. Now, one of them was an infield hit, but one of them was a flare. But hits are hits. And he wound up going 4 for 4, scoring a run, driving in a run. Jonathan India had a 3-hit day. Steer had a 4-hit day. Senzel had a big 3-run home run. The Reds doubled up the Washington Nationals 8-4, and with that have kept pace in first place in the National League Central. And it's really, it's tremendous. And when you consider the fact that, Cincinnati fans, just ask friend of the podcast, Jeff Carr, did not go into this season with the greatest expectations. The fact that they know they're entering the 5th of July with at least a partial claim on first place, fans in Cincinnati are showing up and people are paying attention to this team. It's created a tremendous level of excitement for the Cincinnati Reds. And, they could win the division or they could come back to earth. We talked about yesterday about, the Orioles being a couple years ahead of schedule. The Reds are several years ahead of schedule, and they've really had just one dynamic, really a month and a half of dynamic play. And, they could fall right back to the mean and everything. And the law of averages could catch up to them. The chances of the Cardinals being the team to, come storming back and win the division getting slimmer and slimmer. Look at Adam Wainwright, borderline Hall of Fame pitcher, let up 7 runs, 4 of them earned in 3 1/3 innings in the game in the Cardinals game against Miami today. Miami, another team that I think is unscheduled, but you're starting to look at the teams that are not contending, and the teams that can't seem to get out of their own way. You know, it looms well for Cincinnati fans, and this is going to be a wonderful season. This is going to be a memorable season for Reds fans, whether or not they become a playoff team or not. Sometimes you got to have that year to turn things around. Sometimes you got to have that year to turn things around for the fans. Some fan bases are pretty depressed right now. I talked yesterday about the fact, I mean, by the way, when I'm recording this, I still don't know what happened to Mike Trout's hand, but I was saying that if Trout's going to be out for any amount of time in July, Shohei Ohtani, they have to deal Shohei Ohtani, because otherwise they'll get nothing from him, because he's not going to come back. Would you? Showtime Dodger fan wrote to me on the YouTube page about yesterday's show and said both the Angels and Padres are cursed teams. Of course, he's a Dodger fan, so he can say that from above high. No argument against the Padres. Now, my late father, who's the biggest Giants fan I've ever met in my life, hated the Angels with a passion based upon what happened in 2002. But yeah, save for 2002, the Angels are a pretty snake bit team when you think about it. The Padres, and I've talked about this a lot, that the Padres play in San Diego. I've nicknamed San Diego Buffalo by the Sea. They've had, between the Chargers and the Padres and losing the Clippers, and now losing the Chargers for that matter, there's not been a lot to cheer about if you're a San Diego fan. If you take away 2002 with the Angels have been around for, what is it, 61 years, 62 years? Yeah, 62 years. They were from 1961. They have one pennant. Think about the galaxy of stars who have come through here, and they've had some of the most mind-bogglingly bad luck in the postseason. In '82, they had basically fielded an all-star team with the likes of Reggie Jackson, Don Baylor, Fred Lynn, Rod Carew, Doug DeCinces, Bobby Grich, an unbelievable team. Tommy John on that team, and they were up 2-0 on the Brewers back when it was a best-of-5 series, and the Brewers didn't have Raleigh Fingers. The Brewers were all banged up. Naturally, the Brewers won the last 3 games. They were up 3-1 on the Red Sox, had a 4-run lead going into the 9th inning in a clinching game. 2 home runs, including the Dave Henderson home run, gave the Red Sox the lead. The Angels tied it, and that game was unbelievable, and the Angels couldn't get the winning run across. And then, they collapsed in 1995, and so many years where they had very, very good teams. Probably the best team in the American League in 2008. All throughout the 2000s, they were in the playoffs almost every year. And 2002, they played the Giants there. Now, the Angels famously came back from a 5-0 deficit. But if the Giants could have held on to a 5-0 lead in Game 6, this would still be a team without a World Series title. And now they've been handed Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani. And as a tandem, they've played in 0 postseason games. Trout's only played in 3 in his entire career. They haven't won a postseason game since Game 5 of the 2009 American League Championship Series, despite having, despite having Trout on there, and despite having, for a while, a potential Hall of Fame manager in Joe Madden. And, the Padres have just been, snake bitten. And the 2 times they've gone to the World Series, they've played the best American League team of that decade, the 1984 Detroit Tigers, the 1998 New York Yankees. So, yeah. I mean, Dodgers fans are probably looking at this and going, wow, these 2 teams filled with stars. Ohtani, Trout, Machado, Juan Soto, Xander Bogaerts, all these great stars on both of those teams. And chances are they're both going to miss the postseason this year. And the Dodgers and their fans are licking their lips at the potential of Shohei Ohtani going there. But it's funny. I went on this segment for a reason. Reds fans are having a wonderful year, even if they don't win, even if they don't make the playoffs. They're having a year where fans can get excited about their team. Angel and Padre fans are licking their wounds. But why do they keep going back? Why do fans keep going back? Between the Padres and the Angels, they've combined for one World Series championship, and the Reds haven't gone anywhere since winning the World Series in 1990. So why are these fans keep coming back? I think it comes back to a little bit about the topic: what is the purpose of a season? What does a baseball team and franchise owe its fans? We're going to break that down. I brought this up before, but I think it's a little more complicated than I initially thought. All right. How many of you are daily baseball fantasy players? If you are, guess what? Do you want to win 100 times your money on daily fantasy baseball? Sleeper is offering up to 100 times your payment payout for up to 8 pick contests. Choose as many as 8 players as you like and pick more or less your favorite baseball stats like home runs, strikeouts, hits, and more. Get your picks right and you could win big. Predict the hottest baseball stats like home runs and hits and all that, and cash in on your daily fantasy baseball skills. Use promo code Locked On, and Sleeper will match your first deposit up to $100. Dynamic payouts are live. What are dynamic payouts? In short, each player projection now has a multiplier attached to it as opposed to preset multipliers based on the number of legs in a contest. With dynamic payouts also comes more stack categories to place contests on. You can get higher payouts than other apps with less picks or fewer picks. Built-in group chat functionality where you see and copy your group's picks with the tap of a button, and entries can be made in 30 seconds or less. It's really that easy. Use promo code Locked On and you'll get a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms and use for details. Currently operational in over 30 states. Check out Sleeper today. What does a baseball team owe its fan base? Now, I brought this up before, and I said that obviously what every fan base wants to have is a World Series championship, of course. But not every team's going to have a World Series championship. In fact, 29 out of 30 teams this year are not going to have a World Series championship this year. All right. Does that mean 29 other fan bases are going to walk away completely unhappy? Does that mean 29 other fan bases are going to say, well, that was a waste of time? I think some of you might think that way, and I can't imagine a more sad way to live. I maintain that a Major League Baseball franchise does not owe its fan base a championship. The team owes their fan base an entertaining summer, a reason to go to the ballpark. Now, an entertaining summer can mean lots of different things. And for a while, I was saying their job is to put a contender on the field. Their job is, if you're going to go to the ballpark, give you a reason to go there. And I maintain that is a big part of it. I maintain that's one reason why I keep the summer score to see which teams are in a playoff spot every day. If you wake up, it's in the summertime, excuse me, and your team is a playoff contender, guess what? That team is doing its job. It's providing you with a piece of entertainment for the summer. Excuse my cough right there. And I'm going to take myself, as I've grown up a big Boston Red Sox fan. Obviously, the years I've seen them win the World Series have been thrilling, and it's a great sense of satisfaction at the end of the year. But I was over the age of 30 when they won their first World Series, and I followed the team year in and year out. Did I end every single year smashing my head against the wall saying this is a failure, my life is empty? Well, some years I did, and maybe a lot of you do. But there were obviously years I followed the team, enjoyed the team, had fun with the team, and kept coming back. I'm in my mother's home right now up north, and I was going through my old room, and I found lots of old yearbooks and magazines and everything from baseball seasons of the past. There's a lot of stuff from 2004. This is the Sports Illustrated from when the Red Sox won the World Series in 2004, and obviously there's many mementos of that year. But do you know what? There are as many mementos of other years. This is the yearbook from the 1988 Boston Red Sox. They didn't win the World Series that year. In fact, they didn't win a postseason game. They got swept in the American League Championship Series by the Oakland A's. I will say, without a doubt, this was one of the most fun years I've ever had as a sports fan. Maybe even as much as some of the teams that wound up winning, because that team was filled with entertaining players, some of my all-time favorite players. They had a great big winning streak. It was the Morgan Magic year. It was a year where they were in the middle of the pack at the All-Star game. They switched managers. They went on a great big run, and it was so much fun. There were players from my youth who were still on the team. Dwight Evans, Jim Rice, and Bob Stanley were still on there. A bunch of young players on that team. It was a magical season. And they were a contender. In fact, they wound up going to the American League Championship Series. I think about some years like the 1999 squad, the year after Mo Vaughn left, and that team that got to the ALCS remains one of my favorite teams of all time, mainly because that was when Pedro Martinez dominated, Nomar Garcia Parra was great, and they had this sort of revolving door of veterans who kept showing up. It was one of the most fun seasons I've ever had in my life. They lost in the playoffs, but there was a reason to watch the game and everything. And so I've had that mentality that it's the team's job to put a product on the field that excites the fans. I brought that up for the Cincinnati Reds because the last bunch of years, the Reds, okay, granted, they did make the playoffs in the truncated COVID season, but not a lot of people went to the ballpark that year. And in 2021, they were actually a wild card contender into September. So they provided their fans at least something to root for. But most of the seasons that they've had since losing the wild card game in 2013, you've had a decade where there's really been only one season where they admitted fans to the ballpark that was worth they even put a product on the field worth watching in Cincinnati. So, yeah, you could say those years in between, they didn't do their job. I'm sure there's a lot of Reds fans who will maintain that. And I think if you see how the turnstiles didn't move in those years, and terrible attendance and indifference from Red fans, obviously there's going to be people like Jeff Carr who can be there all the time, but they didn't do their job in that part. And so I kind of maintained that attitude. All right, your job is to put an entertaining product on the field, and that means a contender. But I remember the year before this. In fact, I had a couple of the yearbooks from this one as well. The year 1987, the Red Sox had a losing season that year. They were non-contenders. And yet I remember that season fondly. I truly did. And one of the reasons I remember that season fondly was because that was the year after they lost the World Series famously in 86. And there were a lot of veterans there that they kind of had to clean house on that were not as good. But you started to see players come from the minor leagues. Sam Horn came up, had a great second half of the season. Now, eventually people learned to throw him a curveball, but he was exciting when he first came up. Mike Greenwell had an all-star caliber season. Ellis Burks was clearly a budding all-star. Todd Benzinger was clearly a major league player. Some other players like Jody Reed and Tom Bolton came up from the minor leagues. And while they weren't contending, you were looking at the team saying, oh, they're putting together the foundation for their next good team. And that's another way that a team can not break its covenant with the fans, to give you a reason to come to the ballpark, to put a product on the field worth watching. If you can't put a winner on the field, and by definition, unless everyone's going to go 81-81, there's going to be teams with a losing record. But you could still have a team that has a losing record and still be entertaining to the fans. That 87 team, they didn't win, but he said, oh, you've got a plan. I remember the year after Barry Bonds retired, I was here in the Bay Area, and Bonds was basically the foundation of the Giants for a generation. He was no longer on the team, and they were not very competitive in 2008. But Tim Lincecum was a Cy Young winner. Pablo Sandoval was starting to hit home runs. You saw that there were players like Matt Cain and Jonathan Sanchez and Brian Wilson on the team that you say, hey, Bruce Bochy is the manager. Hey, we're not winning now, but we have a plan. That's the other way you can give your team, you give your fan base a reason to come to the ballpark. All right, it's not happening now, but we're on to something. You won't believe how forgiving a fan base will be if they feel you're onto something. You saw that a little bit last year before, with the Orioles and their fans starting to see some of the players, the Rutschmans and the Connor Guns and like that coming up through the Gunner, sorry, coming up through the farm system and saying, "Oh, okay, there's a plan here. There's a plan here." The plans don't always work out. Just ask Met fans about Paul Wilson, Jason Isringhausen, and Bill Pulsifer. But at least in those years, even when it didn't work, there was a sense of like, are we seeing something? Do, do you even know what you're doing? That's the element for a fan base I want to go see these players before they break out. I want to attach some emotion to these players. I remember when the Nats were terrible and there was this buildup. All national fans became some version of John the Baptist, preaching the arrival of Bryce Harper and Steven Strasburg. And there was a sense for those Nat fans of, okay, yeah, we stink now, but something's coming. Something's coming. That at least there's a direction. And that's another way. The team that had the Greenwells and the Burkses, and for the Giants fan, the teams that had the Lincecums and the Sandovals, slowly becoming the team that they were hoping. And of course, in both cases, they won eventually. The Red Sox didn't win a championship with those players, but they became playoff regulars. And the Giants went on to win a slew of World Series. And that excitement started a couple of years before they were winners. But there's another way a team can give their fans a reason to come to the ballpark and give them quality entertainment. As I said, I have a ton of things from 2004. I almost have as many things from 1983. The Red Sox did not contend in 1983. The Baltimore Orioles wound up winning the division, the pennant, and ultimately the World Series that year. And the Red Sox were not really competitive. They had some very good years. Jim Rice had an excellent season that year. And that was the year that Wade Boggs emerged as a great player, and they had talented pitchers like Bruce Hurst and Bobby Ojeda and John Tudor were on the team, but the team really wasn't that good. And yet, people kept going to the ballpark that year. There was a special reason why. I think you can probably tell by the cover of the yearbook here, and this is of the media guide there. It was Carl Yastrzemski's last season. Yastrzemski is one of the most beloved figures in the history of the Red Sox, and the current incarnation of Red Sox Nation you can directly link to the 1967 pennant. He was a pivotal figure in the history of the Red Sox. And he retired in 1983, and that entire year became a farewell tour of Yastrzemski. And I remember going to the games there and cheering him and giving him a standing O. And that was a reason to go to the park. It was a connection to the past, and it was hope for the future and giving thanks to someone. I bet if I gave Yankee fans some truth serum, they would say they got more emotion out of 2013 and 2014, 2 years where the Yankees did not make the playoffs, remember, they didn't make the playoffs in back-to-back years, that there were more emotional moments from those 2 years than they were in some of the recent years where they made the postseason but were unceremoniously dumped. The 2013 was the year that Mariano Rivera retired. 2014 was, of course, the season-long celebration of Derek Jeter, which I'm not convinced is over. Now, if you ask Yankee fans what they remember about being bumped by the Astros in the 2015 wild card game, or the runner being thrown out against the Red Sox in the 2021 wild card game. I'm not sure they hold those years with any great sense of reverence. Those were years that they made the playoffs. But I guarantee you there's a little quivering bottom lip in memories of Rivera's final year with the Yankees and the final time he was taken out. And manager Joe Girardi had the good sense of letting his longtime teammates Andy Pettitte and Derek Jeter take him out. And they had a nice laugh. And then Rivera hugs both of them, and the fans stood up. I guarantee you more fans remember that than losing the 2015 wild card game to the Astros. And of course, Jeter's final year, which was, this big pageantry and everything. And of course, his final moments, Yankee Stadium, was going to walk-off hit in the bottom of the ninth. Look me in the eye, Yankee fans, and tell me you have fonder memories of the 2021 season, which ended in a wild card loss to the Red Sox, than you did for the 2014 season, a team where the Yankees didn't even make the playoffs, but they got to have those final moments with Derek Jeter. That's another way a team can create that covenant with the fans. Best case scenario is you're putting a championship caliber team on the field. Second best case scenario, you're doing what the Reds are doing, which is putting an entertaining product on the field, a fun team on the field. The next best way is to say, hey, we've got a strategy. We're not winning this year, but bear with us. We know what we're doing. Or finally, just tickle that nostalgia bone. If all else fails, bust out the nostalgia. If all else fails, bring in someone who will at least bring in the cheers and make you remember happier days. Because if you can't provide a present and you're not building for a future, the least you can do is make us remember the past. And those are the ways a team can keep their covenant with the fans. And that's the purpose of a major league season: entertainment. Today is the 5th day of July is when I'm dropping this, and it is an anniversary of a Hall of Famer, but an underappreciated Hall of Famer. It's an underappreciated moment in baseball history. On this day in 1947, the American League was integrated. We all celebrate Jackie Robinson and what happened in 1947, at the beginning of the year when he came up and he integrated the Dodgers. Everyone wears 42. Everyone remembers that. It's a great moment in baseball history. But unfortunately, the legend of that 1947 season has created a false narrative that was perpetuated by the movie 42, a film that I don't dislike, but I think it deals more with mythology than it does with reality. That movie does not mention Larry Doby. The American League also had its first African-American player, and that was Larry Doby. And he was brought right from the Newark Eagles of the Negro Leagues. That's what they were called, the Negro Leagues, right to the Cleveland Indians. That's what they were called. All these problematic names today, I'm just saying that's what they were called. And Bill Veeck, who had been wanting to integrate baseball for several years, there is probably an apocryphal tale that he wanted to buy a team. Supposedly, the rumor was he wanted to buy the Philadelphia Phillies and basically make it the Negro League All-Star team. There's not a lot of evidence to say that ever became anything more than a pipe dream. When he took over the Indians, he integrated them with Larry Doby. And Veeck kind of did things differently than the Dodgers did. We all revere Branch Rickey for being the person who had the idea to integrate baseball and finding the right player in Jackie Robinson and everything like that. But Rickey was also kind of a shrewd businessman and sometimes not the most fair businessman. When he signed players from the Negro Leagues, he offered no compensation from the teams. He just signed them as if they were free agents. And Bill Veeck worked out deals with some of the teams, like the Newark Eagles, which is where Larry Doby was playing for, worked out a deal to purchase his contract and make sure the team he played for didn't just lose a player with no compensation. And you got to see that teams became wary of doing deals with the Dodgers and became more likely to do uh, business with owners like Vec, who are willing to work out fair deals with the Negro League teams as opposed to trying to fleece them. I digress a little bit. Doby came up, and later he became teammates with Satchel Paige, who was, of course, the biggest star in the history of the Negro Leagues. And Satchel Paige also came up in 1947. But on this day, July 5th, 1947, the American League was officially integrated as Doby played his first game with the Cleveland Indians. And there were a lot of people who felt that Doby was going to be the one to integrate baseball first. He had a better career, at least statistically, than Jackie Robinson did in the Negro Leagues, and was considered to be a tremendous talent. And he went on to become a Hall of Famer. Of course, the Indians played in the 1948 World Series, of which Larry Doby was a star on that team, and Satchel Paige pitched in that World Series, meaning the 1948 Cleveland Indians were the first integrated team to win a World Series. The 47 Dodgers made the World Series, but lost the series in 7 to the New York Yankees. So the first integrated World Series champion were the 1948 Cleveland Indians, led by Larry Doby. Larry Doby went on to have a wonderful Hall of Fame career, played with primarily with Cleveland. He also played with the Chicago White Sox, and went on to become uh, a manager, and he also played in the Japanese League as well, and later became a scout, later became a coach, and then eventually went on to become a major league manager. And of course, he was the second African American to be named a manager of a baseball team, once again losing out to a Robinson. Frank Robinson was the first African American manager, and Larry Doby was the second when he became the manager of the Chicago White Sox in 1978. So Doby never got the credit or the love or the attention. Granted, became a Hall of Famer, got his number retired and everything, and may we all be forgotten like that. But he went through the same taunts, he went through the same strife that Jackie did, and we all could have been wearing number 14 instead of 42 if Doby was brought up first. But he wasn't, and still became a Hall of Famer, a World Series champion, and a pioneer in so many ways, and someone worth remembering. And he integrated and played his first game with the Cleveland Indians on this date in 1947. So let's honor briefly the memory of Hall of Famer Larry Doby, a pioneer in his own way. So, and I'm recording this before I got anyone to answer yesterday's trivia question, which I'll repeat now, which was who was the only member of the Oakland A's to who's the only member of the Oakland A's to uh, win the American League MVP, or the All-Star Game MVP. I'm slightly distracted because I just got a thing that Mike Trout is going to miss 4 to 8 weeks due to a broken hand. So goodbye, Shohei Ohtani. And that's too bad. That's really too bad. So we'll be covering more of the games and seeing as the teams round up their season to head to the All-Star break. So talking about the purpose of a season, praising the Reds for giving their fans a reason to go to the ballpark, and remembering the great Larry Doby. This has been Locked On MLB for the 5th day of July, 2023. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully. Toodaloo.